Welcome to the SAG-AFTRA Foundation's The Business Program. I'm Jazz Tangcay, Senior Austin's Editor at Variety. Now, without further ado, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce showrunners, Courtney Lilly from Blackish, Saladin Patterson from The Wonder Years, Marisa Cerar from Women of the Movement, Prentice Penny from Insecure, Phil Augusta Jackson from Grand Crew, and Tracy Oliver from Harlem. Hello and welcome to you all.
Hello.
Hello.
So excited to be here and hear your stories. Tracy, I'm just going to dive right on in and start with you. Going back to Girls Trip, you were the first Black woman to ever write a film for over $100 million movie. You were hugely celebrated for that. Talk about the journey since. Like, what has it been like for you?
Well, I don't have to explain as much how Black women are bankable and are stars and are important. And I think when I go back to just like a few years ago, there was this idea that Black content wasn't mainstream or wasn't, I guess, mainstream beyond Black people. Like that you couldn't like have stars that were universal. You could, in particularly Black women. I think that there was this idea that Black men could transcend, but Black women in particular. And I think that's just because it's always harder for women, especially in comedy, to market ourselves as mainstream or to get even people to believe that we're funny and that we can be raunchy just like the men. So I do less of that in my preamble and pitches now. I don't have to start by saying, so Black women can be this or Black women can be that. It's just I can kind of jump in and just pitch now. And I think that's been the greatest like part of Girls Trip is that now we're beyond the can Black women even like be bankable. And now we can just talk about like the creative and the stories. And I'm just happy to move beyond that. And, you know, I'm going to shout out Prentice, you know, with Insecure as well, because I think that contributed heavily to that conversation in addition to Girls Trip.
Prentice, talk about, you know, to Tracy's point, the pitches, like, you know, we all grew up and, you know, we didn't see ourselves on TV. Now I turn on any network, any streaming platform. We are seeing people that look like us, you know, our stories. Like, what has that been like? What has your journey been like?
I think mine is closely, I would say, tied in some way to Saladin in some way. Like I remember, you know, my first show was Girlfriends, and when all the Black shows were like put on the network plantations of UPN and the CW or the WB at the time, and it was like, oh, that's over there. It's like it was like the Negro Leagues of shows essentially. And then I remember the lean years when it was like after the writer's strike where like they had canceled Black shows and there weren't any on the air, right? And that's when, you know, I was working on being the only person of color on shows like, you know, Brooklyn Nine-Nine or Happy Endings or Scrubs or whatever the show was, because they just weren't making that content anymore. And then, you know, Blackish came out, I think like 9 months before us, but just that tough time of not seeing yourself. Can I pitch a Black show? Because you're not making any. Nobody's buying any shows, right? And so you're wondering, like, when is that going to happen again? And so it's just such a nice thing. And I think streaming obviously has helped a lot of that because networks are obviously so concerned with bigger numbers as opposed to like specificity of audience. And I think that's the thing that allows those things. It's not worried about like, oh, did this get 15 million people? It's like, nobody cares. If the show gets like 1 million viewers, then that's a hit. It's just, are people talking about it? Is it impacting culture? I think different things matter now, right? Than they did, you know, in that lean year. So to me, it's just exciting to be like, oh, I don't know about that Black show. What's that show? Like, because before you had to know there were two and you better know them, you know what I mean? So now there's so many, which I think is so great. And I'm excited to see that for other cultures as well, to like for them to get their due too. So it's just really great, honestly. Like one of the best things that I'm so excited about is, and I think everybody in this call will appreciate this, is, you know, that like we all have shows and we're all doing stuff. It's frustrating and nice to be like, oh no, that Black person's in a deal. No, that Black person's in a deal. Nope, they're not available because they're in a deal. Because before that would have never have happened. That would have never even been a thing. So I'm just so excited to see so many of my peers and all of us in these deals where they're just not even available. Like that to me is a real litmus test of like, okay, things are like slightly better for sure.
Yeah. Saladin, what's your take on that and your experience? What has that been like?
Like Prentice said, he and I have kind of had similar paths in terms of, that's just our way of saying we're old. We've been around a long time. We've seen the industry shift at least a couple of times. But I certainly do remember the days when Black writers were relegated to just being on Black shows on WB, UPN, CW, and things like that. And again, nothing wrong with those shows, and those are all, it was just the business model of those networks at the time. And then about the time when the long tail came out, when the long tail came out, and started looking at what Amazon was doing in terms of the fact that you can kind of find a niche market, like Prentice was saying, and really support creative content by targeting specifically people who are your fans. We started to then see the proliferation of the cable networks and then after that the streaming channels. And so, in hindsight, I see now is all part of God's plan in terms of my education. But I went from when comedy imploded, I went to this show called Psych on the USA Network. At that time, it was just Psych and Monk. And original content on cable was still kind of rare. I mean, you had Mad Men on AMC, Psych and Monk on USA, and then HBO obviously has always had original programming. But that was such an interesting time in terms of the shift in the industry, and I learned so much from being able to be in that cable world, to where when the streaming channels came through and when all the other cable networks realized, hey, we can develop 5 shows and have a targeted audience, get a lot of awards, and we don't have to compete with the audience size of ABC and NBC and Fox, and that opened up so many doors for me in terms of then being able to target my development and creativity and things like that, to where look, it's not that the industry was trying to equalize things, the industry cares about making money. It just so happened that they realized they can make money off of diverse content, in that way. And I think we've all benefited from that. Tracy's point, the point you made about Tracy is interesting too. I think the same thing has happened on the feature side, but maybe not quite as much in terms of them realizing how bankable shows can be with very targeted audiences, which is one of the reasons why what Tracy did with Girls Trip was great, because it showed that we can still have relevance and have a big, still be a big blockbuster. Although I gotta say, Tracy, you made my life miserable with Girls Trip because when I was running The Last OG, I inherited the show where Tracy Morgan started that season not knowing who Tiffany Haddish was. In the middle of the season, she became the biggest comedy star in the country. Mm-hmm. And that did not make for a very fun experience running that show. Let me just say that. Congrats to you, though. I'm glad it worked out well for you.
Thanks. I'm sorry about that.
But yes. So, it certainly has been interesting to see how the business models have affected our experiences in terms of diversity. And I agree with Prentice. It feels like it's a great time, like a halcyon time for Black writers and Black creators. I'm hesitant to say that because I don't want to, quote unquote, jinx anything, but it certainly is the best time to be talented and Black, I think, in this industry in terms of what my experiences have been. So, that's a good thing. And hopefully we will continue to now be ahead of the curve instead of catching up to it.
Amazing. Phil, what about for you? What's your journey been like? And, especially with Grand Crew coming out, talk about that and your experience.
For sure. I mean, it's been fun. My first job was with Key and Peele, the sketch show, in the end of 2013 into 2014. And I think during that time, that felt like almost the wave after the wave that Prentice was just talking about. So I had the opportunity to kind of cut my teeth as this kind of digital thing was expanding even more and more, as people were starting to shift the focus from watching TV live more consistently to being like, oh, Netflix is a thing. Oh, I'm going to watch this online, et cetera, et cetera. And, for me, I think I was fortunate, just to hop around, I was fortunate that the first room I was in was a room that was for a show that had 2 Black creators. I know not every Black writer is fortunate enough to have that experience, especially off the bat. And so it was really empowering for me to see these 2 dudes with a very specific comedic voice doing their thing, being very specific with their comedy and their style and the choices that they make. And so I learned a tremendous amount, just working underneath Jordan and Keegan, and then met Tracy after that on Survivor's Remorse, which is a very specific show about a Black family. And so almost those first two jobs, I was like, oh, it is possible to tell Black stories and have a following. And so I think that was really, really significant for me, and I was fortunate that happened at the beginning of my career. And after that, I went and did network. I worked on Brooklyn Nine-Nine for 4 seasons. It was 4 years of my life. It was like a master class and like doing the big kind of high volume, 22 episodes, et cetera, et cetera. But then as time went on, it just felt like even with a show like Brooklyn Nine-Nine, the success of that show was very much contingent on a very specific audience finding it. And even now, having a network show, it almost feels like a lot of people that watch Grand Cru specifically don't even know that it's on NBC. Like when they talk about it, they're like, oh, where do I watch that? Oh, Peacock, Hulu. You know what I mean? So it's like, I think it just goes to show how the playing field is flat as far as the actual purveyors of the content that we get to create. And the opportunity is there to make stuff that is very uniquely you. And even with this network show, it's like, I go to a wine bar, I drink with my friends. So I got a show about a group of friends that drink at a wine bar. You know what I mean? If you rock with it, you rock with it. If you don't, then there's a ton of other stuff out there. And that level of specificity, I think, is a beautiful thing. And not to jinx it either, but my hope is that those opportunities kind of continue, and that there are more people of color that get an opportunity to be specific in their unique point of view.
Yeah. Courtney, what about for you and your journey to Blackish and, having this incredible show on the air? Talk about your experience.
It's interesting off of what everybody's been saying. For me, like, so much of this business, especially when you're first starting out, is luck, and there's perceptions, and like everybody on this panel is a very strong writer. And that's how you get to survive as long as you do, to be in charge of shows and do all that kind of stuff. But like, literally, there's a friend that I have in common with Prentice, and I remember joking him once when he's like, how come you've never worked with Prentice? And I'm like, we're both upper level Black guys. You wouldn't hire both of us, And it's just like, coming up when I did, starting in 2003, you knew who people were, but you didn't necessarily always spend the time in the room with them. And the luck part of it too, and I say it's luck, like, I always think of like the UPN shows and those like the early, when it was WB shows as really talent incubators, man. Like, like Prentice, you said girlfriends, and like, and like all the people that came off the game, and like Tracy Ellis Ross, who was on Blackish, people were just like, where did she come from? And it's like literally Diana Ross's daughter, who did 100-something episodes of television. Like these things were happening all the while. And like for me personally, I had my first ever showrunner meeting with Yvette Lee Bowser, who was on the first 2 seasons of Blackish and has become a mentor and a friend and all this other kind of stuff. And I went in there, it was at her house. We talked for 2 hours. I was like, I crushed that meeting. I'm gonna have a job. I'm gonna get out of this law firm mail room that I'm in. And they wanted somebody at a producer level. And I was just like, oh, all right, well, I'm in the game. We'll see how it goes. And because of the diversity programs that they've had and just luck, I ended up getting staffed on Arrested Development. I was the exact same writer, either show. But that's like a fork in the road for people, because then all of a sudden I got kind of like, it's like, oh, you got validated by, I'm just going to use the word mainstream show, And that then changed perception of my career and the idea who could be hired and all that other kind of stuff. And Kenya, who's hilarious, who, I've known since those days, literally he jokes about it. And he joked about it the other day on a podcast. And like, he still has me in his phone as Courtney, Black guy from Arrested. That's kind of what it was. He's like, you're a Black guy with good credits, even though we never worked together, and for me, I'm excited for all the opportunity that this is presenting to the next generation of writers who will be really bouncing off each other the way that like Girlfriends and The Game and some of these other shows were talent incubators. Now I think we're seeing many of them, and not just on our shows. I mean, like what's going to be happening in the next, 5, 7, 10 years is going to be awesome. And I think for all the reasons that we're talking about, that it doesn't just have to be like, okay, you need to get, so-and-so weigh-ins, and then you need to do a multicam, and that's how you get a show. The idea that we have the Key and Peels of the world, that we have the Lovecraft countries of the world, that we have so many variety kinds of show that writers don't feel like they need to just hit this invisible moving target is super exciting to me. And it's exciting for me to still be in the game while we're doing that. But I'm super excited to see what it's going to do for young writers who will not have to feel literally when I was starting off in my career, I was trying to write jokes for the upper middle class Orange County white family that didn't love each other. And I was just like, all right, well, I'm going to see, and now not that personal experience has to be everything, but it's just, you're not thrown into the deep end and asked to swim. Sometimes maybe you'll land in a gentle place where you'll be able to grow and get better at your craft. You can't promise anything. There's no promising of mentoring, all those other kind of things. But just to be able to sit there and go there's a little solid ground underneath you, I'm excited for what's to come.
Marisa, what about you?
Wow. I mean, what is left to say after all this? But my journey is a little different, but I think it's really, to sum it up, it's from being the only one in the room to being the boss. And what, working for my second job that I worked on was a limited series on Fox, and Gina Prince Bythewood and Reggie Rock Bythewood were the creators. And I had worked on, 60 something episodes of television over 3 years prior to that. And, I learned so much, and I was running set second day as a staff writer. They were like, you're fine, you're going to be great. So it prepared me for all this. But I always tell Gina and Reggie this, that working for them changed my life, because not only was I no longer the only one in the room and then looked at okay, there's a Black character, what do you think they'd say, MJ? Also, I'm adopted. My parents are white. I grew up with 7 brothers and sisters. I grew up in rural, NASCAR, natty light drinking Illinois. So I didn't come from the sort of, especially the characters they're looking for, more, city kids. I had a different worldview, and I think I am an intersectional writer, and I resented being looked at as, okay, Black writer, tell, what would the Black character say? Because I had so much more to offer. When I worked on Shots Fired and I had 2 Black bosses and I was just looked at as a writer, it just changed my life. It changed everything. I was the same person. I had the same ideas, but my confidence and myself, it just shifted. And I text them, I think once a year. And Gina actually went on to direct, the first episode of Women of the Movement. And I love her so much. Just thanking them for that, because my confidence went through the roof, and my career changed because I had these people telling me, I believe you're not a token. We're not just looking at you for one thing. We believe in you. You have talent. And so from that moment on, I just knew I could run my own show. When the opportunity finally came to me with the Emmett Till Project, Women of the Movement, and I wanted to approach it, I actually didn't see it as a specific experience. I thought of it as a universal experience. It was a family, it was a mother, it was a son. It was about human beings and loss and grief and fighting back. I think all of those experiences, transitioning from the only one in the room to someone with power, making decisions and hiring people, really played into my approach. And, when I staffed my room and when I hired the directors, I took everything that I learned and how I felt so small. And then that transition to where I felt empowered. I hope that I spread it on to my show, but it was, a similar experience, but I honestly, not to be trite, I'm so glad that I went through all of it, because it prepared me for this insane, job. I'm now on my second show. We're about to prep for my Hulu show. And it just prepared me for the chaos that ensues every day.
Yeah. I mean, we'll do that. So many of the, barriers are being broken left, right, and center. Goals are being attained. It is, we are moving, forward, and all these goals that previously, could never be attained, we are here. What is it like being in the writer's room, telling these stories, filling the writer's room, with people, with diversity, and looking around and seeing a diverse writers room? What is that like for each of you to walk in to work every day and experience that compared to 10 years, 20 years ago? I mean, that shift.
For me, it's amazing. It's just the number of writers who exist. I mean, just from so many different backgrounds, it is such a gift. I mean, and when they send me these emails, it's like diverse writer, I get so annoyed because I'm like, what does that mean? I'm like, what do you mean diverse writer? I'm like, I want a bio, like tell me a little bit about them, because it's no longer just like, what is their racial background, ethnic background, like what is their gender identity? I want to know what their story is. And for me, it was, exhausting, looking through the number, the lists, the names, the samples, the bios. There's so many, but it was so exciting because of all, I wanted to hire, 50 people. I could hire 6. And I'm so excited to see what the rest of these Black and brown writers out there have to offer, because my mind was blown at how much talent and unique points of view there are out there on the page. And it's thrilling. It was really thrilling.
Yeah, I think
you got Prentice. No, you go first. I'm probably going to end up talking about you. So
I was just going to say, I agree with Marisa, is that one, I mean, as a comedy writer, I know what the bid's going to be. I don't have to guess like what reference of bid is this I have to catch up to, this white bid I have to catch up to. But just I remember when we were staffing Insecure, and one of the things that would always, frustrate me, certainly being on shows where I was the only one, it'd be like, and this is no knock to guys that go to Harvard, but it'd be like 5 white guys that go to Harvard and me. And I'd be like, damn, do we need 5 white dudes from Harvard? Can we do 3 and then give me like a Pakistani dude and like mix in just like, do we need all that, right? And so when we were staffing our show, one of the things that like just happened immediately was every agent was like sending me, this is a writer who's just like Issa. This is a writer who's just like Issa. And I understood that was their window to like finally give those writers the shot. But also I was like, I don't need a writer like Issa. I have Issa. Like I need something that's going to like contrast against this energy. I want to see other kinds of Black women that are just going to reinforce the thing that the person that's here is already going to do. I want like, where's a weird, like where's a louder version of this, or a darker version of this, or a slightly odd version of this Black woman, right? And just different voices. And so for me, because I was like, I got to see white people fill those same roles. I got to see the weird, quirky white guy, or the like loud, obnoxious white guy. And they got to be a full breadth of people. And we were like, everybody was sending me this once kind of like Black woman. I was like, no Black woman can speak for all these experiences. And even if I chock full this with all different kinds of Black women, there's still so many Black women I'm missing, right? And I think that was the most exciting thing for us at filling our room was I never wanted a voice to feel repetitive. It was almost like I always said, like we were trying to feel like staff it, like, I think just because of what I had seen, it was like when you're thinking about like Avengers or something, there's not like 8 Iron Men, right? There's like a guy that does the Iron Man thing. There's a guy that does the Hulk thing. There's a dude that shrinks, and they all bring like a different skill set that like helps the collective. And so that was really the thing that was the most exciting, was just, again, like bringing in so many different kinds of voices that you would not normally see. That normally on a show, it'd be like, great, we got our one Black person who has to like be all these kinds of people all rolled into one, which obviously no one can be. So that was, I think, the most exciting.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think, yeah, absolutely. I think there's a common misperception, just like industry wise, and I think in other industries too, where like if you have people of color in the room, there's almost like a tone that it's like you're doing a favor by having them in the room or something like that, where it's like, no, like for this show specifically, I need people that are Black to be in this to be in this room. And I think that maybe that misconception comes from the fact that most showrunners, and the tide seems to be changing, but most showrunners are white. So it seems like, oh, for this show, like you might have 1 or 2 Black people, but really at the core, you're doing that to kind of just fill a certain space for a certain type of joke, kind of like Marisa was talking about. It's like, you don't want to be looked at for that thing. But I think with the content and with more people having the opportunity to actually be at the helm, it's like, yeah, you need a lot of different people that have a lot of different looks and a lot of different points of view. And I'm glad you went first, Prentice, because I think also I didn't mention, like, I got to work with Prentice on Insecure, and everything he's saying is how the room was designed. I think it was beautiful to see, like, yeah, a room full of Black people doesn't mean a room full of the same exact type of person. We're all so different. Insecure might be the most diverse room that I've been in. And it was like 90% Black. So it's like one of those things where, personally, when it came to staffing, it was a breath of fresh air to be entrusted with the responsibility to staff that room with people that you know, are people of color and also, you know, fit the vibe of the show. And it felt nice to actually create in that space, just given, you know, other experiences that we've all obviously had in rooms and stuff like that. So
to piggyback on what they're saying, but probably in a less sentimental way, what I'm enjoying is that Black writers in particular, or people of color, are able to get paid now. You know, like there's enough competition out there that it's like, and everybody sees it in the studios. It's like, you know, and look, I mean, everybody maybe had different stories than I had growing up, but a lot of times, like off of what Phil was saying, it's kind of like a sense of like, oh, these are favors, your diversity, all that other kind of stuff. There was money set aside. And the money was never the same money as, like, you know, Prentice was talking about, like, for the 5 Harvard dudes and all that other kind of stuff, who they would hire off and find all the money in the world for. Now it's trickling down in a positive way. You know, like, you know, there are premium, like, opportunities that certainly weren't there, I would say even 5 or 6 years ago, as I'm seeing. And, like, it is, and I personally enjoy that part of it too. Because I think, like, it's one thing to say they love us, but, you know, again, not to be mercenary in it, but, you know, that's how you really show. And again, Prentice was talking about it earlier, people on deals. Let's see it. Let's see what happens. Give us the opportunity. That's the one thing I've seen, especially in my experience with, you know, whether it's Black entertainers, Black athletes, you give us the opportunity, we're going to succeed. And and now the opportunity in a business that's been very slow to grant opportunities is, at least in the writing end of it, the producing end of it, the show running end of it. Like, I mean, like everybody I know is going to work their asses off to make those deals work. You know, and that their mid-level people are getting paid premium mid-level people. You know, I remember hearing deals back in the day where, you know, executive story editors would be getting paid like as much as, like, you know, the diversity quote co-EPs and stuff like that. Like, and the business itself, the agents are changing their tunes, you know. And again, I'm not saying any of it's permanent. Everybody could change their minds at the snap of a finger, but like that is as important part as having access to me, is that, like, the access is as close to equal as we continue to fight to make it equal as possible.
Right. It's an interesting thing too, though. Like you mentioned, you know, the agencies and the agents, you know, pushing their clients more,
Yep.
the diverse clients more, which is great. But it's like, you know, on the one hand, when we've had these successes in terms of, you know, so many Black writers employed, so many Black writers getting paid, like you said, it's exposed other areas in the industry. I do think that need to catch up a little bit, and I think the agency side is one of those, because, as we said earlier, you know, so many times over the past few years, the only qualification for someone to be submitted to me as a writer is them being Black.
Yep.
And I'm like, well, you know, that doesn't mean that they're right for my show, you know, and it's because the agents have these diverse clients, and it's great, and they're pushing them, and not complaining about that, but they're still cookie cuttering us, you know, in that, and, you know, I would love to see some more diversity on the agency side, so that, because again, the shows that I've staffed, I call Courtney, I call Prentice, you know, I tried to staff Phil and he was too busy, so I'm not calling him. But, you know, those are the people I call to say, hey, this is what I need. They're pushing X writer on me. They work for you, whatever. Let me know the real, like, that's where the hiring is happening, because the agencies are just slapping them on the cover letters, you know, saying they're diverse and whatever. So it is hopefully that momentum, like you said, Courtney, hopefully we'll continue to benefit from it, and hopefully it'll spill over into some of the other areas too that will then help us continue to benefit from it.
And to Courtney's point, and you've all been talking about it, the next generation of writers, you know, like, what advice would you give them? And also, what is it like hearing and seeing this feedback? Like, now we live in this world of real-time reactions. So, you know, an episode airs and you're like, I feel seen, or like, oh my gosh, I want to write for the show, or like, this is inspiring me to like write my story or our stories. Like, what is that like for you? And then what advice would you give to those tuning in? Like, where to begin? Tracy, I'm going to start with you. You've been quiet there a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, well, I'll back it up. So when I came in, I was like that generation right after Prentice, Courtney, and Saladin, where it was like really bleak. Like, y'all done the UPN run, and then I was like, yeah, I was inspired by y'all. And then when I got here, I was like, so we stopped. So there's
that's it.
Okay, cool. All right, with Medea, got it. And it was just like a really sad sad time for like Black content, and really disheartening and demoralizing, because I'm not even kidding. I had a producer told me, like, if you want to work, you gotta stop thinking and dreaming about writing Black characters. Like, just like imagine a white family and go in there
Yikes.
and do your best every day. And I was like, okay. And so that's what I did. That was my first job was for aliens and a white family. So which is like really telling to me that it was easier to get aliens on the air. But and no knock to the show, it was The Neighbors. I had a great time, but it was not the same.
That was Jamie Gertz. That was your JB Gertz thing, right?
Yeah,
I can't believe I remember that. That's why.
that's so funny. But yeah. And anyway, in my mind, I had to do this acceptance of like, I guess this is what it is. I guess my stories, the stuff that I was inspired by growing up that I want to see now is just not going to happen. I didn't predict this shift happening, because it really, I don't know if you guys remember this, but like, I mean, y'all lived through it too, but it was really bleak and it just didn't seem like it was going to change anytime soon. And so now when I have like younger Black writers or just writers of color in my rooms, and they're like just kind of living it up and having a good time, I sound like their 75-year-old grandmother, but I'm like, listen up, guys. Like, it wasn't always like this. When I arrived, it was, the dark days, and it was bleak, and, don't take this for granted. And that's kind of how I feel. I really just remember what it felt like. And that's the thing that I just want to impart to like the new writers coming in, is that like, be grateful for this. It's an amazing time. We get to talk about ourselves and have fun. Like, case in point, when I met Phil, you were going to do wine in Silver Lake like all the time. I just remember that was your thing. And then one time we went, I forgot where we went, but we went on several bar trips.
We hopped around. Yeah.
And it was like eventually too drunk to remember it all, but cut to Grand Cru, and I'm watching it and I'm like, well, I'll be like, that's Phil's life.
Yeah.
That's literally like how I don't know if you still live like that, but that's how he was living then. And I just thought, what a blessing, how incredible that he gets to write about himself, that he gets to write about his friends and have fun. And it's just a fun show. And it's like just unique to his experience, but that's something that didn't exist like 10 years ago. We didn't get to tell our stories. We had to kind of like adapt to whatever else, was going on in the room. And so I just think like it's an incredible time where I get to make money writing about being drunk. And like, that's what I have a lot of experience in that, and I get to do that for a living, and it's fun. So yeah, I think with the new writers, I just want to impart like, be grateful. Thanks to Courtney and Prentice and Saladin and everybody that like kind of paved the way for all of us to have like these shows and these opportunities, because it wasn't always like that. And then also, and this might be bad, but I'm going to say it anyway, I think there's some newer writers that are not taking the craft as seriously. And I think that's because there are so many opportunities. Like when I was coming in, you kind of had to be great because you were up against 10 other people for one slot. Yeah. And now, because we're stretched thin, people are just kind of phoning it in. And I'm like, you're not going to be able to do what we do and run shows and kind of ascend if you don't take it seriously. So that's the one thing. I think learn the craft and be grateful, but also take the job seriously.
I am so glad you said
a word. That is
exactly. I'm so glad you said that, Tracy, because I was sitting there saying, I was like, how controversial do I want to be?
I was thinking the same. I was like, hey, that's a word.
All being nice. But no, seriously, I cannot agree with you more. It's one of those things. We're talking about how great it is, and we want that to continue. But there's also the danger of this pendulum swinging too far in the direction, and then we have to then kind of account for those things. I have about 3 old man soapboxes that I get on that my writers get tired of me doing. So I'm not going to bore you with it, but one of those is, it's the back in my day. Back in my day, you didn't get promoted, every season. You had to work for it, and there were flaws with that as well, but to your point, Jazz, to the question, what I try to instill in my younger Black writers, Tracy, as you say, let them know it wasn't always like this, and this is the controversial part. Back when, I was the only Black writer on the staff, as much as that represented what was wrong with the industry, I was blessed by having white showrunners that did recognize the importance of mentorship, okay? And did take the opportunity to make sure I learned the skills I needed to learn so that when I was given the opportunity to be a showrunner, I was prepared. Again, a lot of flaws with that industry, with the industry and that system, but I try to remember that now because, because we are such a hot commodity now. I mean, the example I give, I had a mini room for the Wonder Years. First of all, I want to point out, the Wonder Years could never exist before today's TV environment. I do recognize that. There's no way they're going to let me tell a story about a Black family in the late 60s before now. So I appreciate that. But, the downside to that is I have a writer who was in our mini room. We did 4 episodes in the mini room. That person then went on to do a Netflix show for, let's say, 12 episodes, okay? The mini room was their first job. I gave them their first job. They go to Netflix. God bless them. They convinced Netflix to make them a story editor after having done 4 episodes in the mini room. Then they want to come back to the show as executive story editor. I'm like, whoa, wait a minute now. There's no way in hell I'm going to let you do a double bump when I gave you your first job. You're going to come back, and I know for a fact that I have staff writers who've been here this whole time who have more experience. So it's like, and again, God bless their agents, and the person who I love, great writer, they send me an email saying, I know it's a lot, but I just don't want my career to be derailed. So there is this mentality, and again, I'm going to get off the soapbox, but executives are starting to say similar things. They're starting to say, oh my goodness, we got sold a bill of goods with X writer because they were at this level. And we realized they couldn't deliver or perform. And, I have co-APs. I have people who are co-AP level trying to be on the show who've never been in the editing bay before. That's no use to me. I can't have a co-AP who can't run a room, pretty much. So anyway, that's the downside. And I think our responsibility, obviously, is to step in and be the mentors that people were to us and make sure that people are being told. And some people listen, some people won't. It's hard to turn down money. I can't tell you how many people said, thanks, but no thanks to us because I wouldn't give them a bump or something. So, it's going to be what it is.
It's so funny you say that, man, because I'm like in the Game of Thrones place of it, dude. I'm like that old bum guy from the north who's like, winter's coming, man. Like all the summer children who grew up in abundance and just don't have the sense of like, this could stop. And I watch a lot of sports. I have the mentality of an athlete. Like we do. There's a shelf life for what we do. Yeah. And just like if you're a basketball player, it's not just when you practice that's important. It's you get your diet. You're actually training. You're doing all this other stuff to prepare for the games. And and I talk about it when I was on Arrested Development, man. Like again, it was not a place where it was going to naturally succeed. And so like dumb stuff, like a writer would talk about a movie I'd never heard before. I'm younger than everybody there. I have different cultural experiences. I would see that movie, see the movie the director did before, see the director did after it, and wait till it came up again and have something to say. And it's just the amount of work you do all around that margins to get good. How much reading I did, how much writing I did, all that other work, so that when the opportunity does present itself, because it wasn't like, look, and again, I don't want this. I was a staff writer twice. I was let go of shows, like sometimes things happen. You don't get your contract picked up. You're not the right fit for that kind of thing. And it's just like, it's a different animal. And for you to make your career the thing that's going to be, it's like, really just focus on getting your game up. We're like musicians in a way too, man. It's just like, sometimes you're coming in, it's like, hey, I'm on the Wonder Years. Look, what do you need me to do? All right, I'm Herbie Hancock, but I got to play piano behind Miles Davis. Bet. I'll do my own record when it's time to do my own record. But like, it's really a mentality about finding your place in your craft, because that's what's going to give you longevity, man.
Yeah. I'll step on the soapbox with people saying about too. I could not agree with all this. And the one thing and I think a lot of us, obviously, like I remember Mara even being like, when I started off being like, no, we're going to keep you. And you don't know why your parent, like I equate to her like an aunt, right? I would never call her mother because she would be like, so man, she's like, we got that. But I just remember what that was, right? It's like sometimes like your parents are trying to teach you something when it's hard, right? And you may not understand, but I got to see so many things because I didn't have to explode so fast. And I think what's so great is like, and I think, Tracy was saying this too, it's like when you come into the business, right, it shapes fully who you are, right? So if you're coming in the business now, to me, I equate it like my kids. It's like my kids were born seeing Obama as their first president. So they don't know all this lineage of white men before they go like, I got a black president. So if you're coming up right now, you're like, there's all these black shows. This is what it's all supposed to be popping like, right? Yeah. But you don't know what's coming behind it. And in some way, it's like, the whole point of what we went through, right? Like how you're saying, Saladin, is that somebody doesn't have to go through behind that, right? Like I watch white guys get promoted so fast and it's a little where you're like not getting those opportunities, right? Whereas now somebody, like you said, they could do a show 3 years and be a showrunner, right? So those, I love that, right? I try to tell younger people like, move like you're white, but remember that you're black, right? So white people don't think about how they're moving and they're just always playing offense, right? You're always moving forward. I'm always trying to score the basket, right? Whereas black people, when we have to score in this business, we have to play defense. We have to like move 2 steps to the left and move 1 step to the right, take a step backwards, then move forward. It's like we're trying to move forward by moving backwards and moving all in the same ways. Whereas if you're a white writer, you're just like, I'm just trying to get my show. I'm not thinking about nothing else. I'm just trying to make this thing happen. And I think like, that's great. You can move like that too, but remember, right, who you are too, right? So you have to be, because you are carrying the other weight behind you. So I love that some of my writers will never know what it's like to be the only one in the room. Some of them went from like Insecure to working on rap shit. And like Issa, I love that. She'll never know that experience. She like, her first show was like Insecure. It's like, she'll never know that experience. Like I had a different experience, right? And I think those are the things you want. But I do think there is a danger of anything of giving someone something too soon before they're not ready, no matter what you are. And I think we understand the consequence of it more and what it means because we're not rewarded with it every day. And if you don't take that part of your craft seriously, it doesn't just impact your show, right? It impacts a lineage of other people's shows behind you too. So I think because we had to understand, what it was like to be the only one or to be marginalized, when now you're just like, oh, it's all good, whatever. You have to remember, yeah, it's all good, but like, remember, you know what I mean? They can pull this in a heartbeat and then it's be what it is. So I always just try to caution them and be like, this is great. This is love and you should move and get your money and move like a white man. Do it. But just remember, if you don't take it seriously like that, right? Then like, it's consequence.
Because to your point, Prentice, again, what Tracy touched upon this as well, we are being given many more opportunities to succeed now than we've ever been given before. I still think we're only going to be given maybe 1.5 opportunities to fail though. Maybe 1.5, so that's the part that hasn't really changed as much. So, we got to be, mindful of that. And
even though, and just to add to that, and I think you see that too, right? And like in ways the awards fall out. Right. You're like, we're given opportunities to succeed, but our art still isn't fully like accepted and looked at yet. Right. In the same way where it's like, oh, there's 4 black shows for best comedy or best drama. Right. So it's like, that's when oh, okay, we're allowed to play, but you're still allowed to play more over there. Unless there's something that we deem artistic and redeemable about it. Right. Like even like the Emmys when we were nominated 2020, like they opened more slots. More shows for color, but they just put it with more white shows. So it's like, what was the point, right? So it's like, you just could have kept it how it was. So I think, yes, you're like, I agree. It's like, it's moved from like, you don't have to be on the Black network fully. You can be on our networks and we'll give you these deals, but you're still not, you're still not.
Amazing. Marisa, what about you? What advice would you give to those aspiring writers out there?
Well, off of all of this, what I realized with this last show staffing is how my path was so different because from a staff writer, like I had to do everything. I had to pitch to actors. I sat in casting sessions. I had to pitch my episodes. I was in the editing room a little bit. I was on set all the time because we shot here in Burbank. And then when I went to Shots Fired, I went to North Carolina and I got to work with Casey Lemons and like walk side by side and who I love her too. But Reggie and Gina just threw me into the next level. And then I was the supervising producer and I actually got the bump because I had really smart agents, but I really earned it because I had been producing, but it's so true. I went 13 Reasons Why and was basically like co-running the show with 2 other supervising producers. And then Handmaids was pretty traditional. I was, running set, but I was upper level at that point. But so many writers who are co-EPs, supervising producers have never been on set. never
Crazy.
have really never had to sit and talk to an actor and really like walk them through their season arc. And I was doing that when I was a co-producer. And so that for me, I just had to take a step back, and because I was just assuming that some of the upper levels had had the same path. They had not, asking way more questions when I staffed and calling every showrunner, anyone in the room, just to find out exactly, what their level truly was, how many passes, did they have, how many revisions on their scripts. And now what I can do is there are a couple people who have really stepped up, and I'm going to be the Reggie and Gina to them.
Yeah.
I took her aside and I said, like 6 years ago, I was taken aside and I was said, I don't care what your level is. I'm going to push you harder. I'm going to work you longer. You're going to be here later than the co-EPs. And I don't care, because you have shown that you're invested and you're talented. And so that's what I told her. And I think anyone I can find, PAs from Women of the Movement, because I moved, to Mississippi to film the whole time, and I was on set every day. And we had, PAs who want to be writers, and they're, young Black writers, and they're constantly in contact with me. They have my personal information. I'm trying to hook them up with managers, and my manager's going to sit down and give them a mentoring interview. And I'm doing everything I can, because I can't go back and change, the industry shifted, and all the mini rooms and streaming has changed, what our experience is and how long we have writers, and if they can even go to set. And now with COVID, I don't even know who's going to go with me all around the world to shoot this Hulu show this year. It's probably going to be me again, but I'm trying really hard to make it different, make it not so. I'm trying really hard to pass on advice, to give opportunities. And I told them, even though you're not on contract, I'm going to be reaching out for you to give notes on your cuts. Mm-hmm. If you want to be in, I can't require you to be there, sound for music spotting and sound spotting, but I really want you to have the opportunity, and it's up to you to take it at this point. So I realize it is different. I don't expect them to walk the same journey I did last year, before I realized that everybody has a different journey. I was really resentful. I was like, what? Like, what's wrong with you? Like, why have you not been here before? But I just didn't realize they weren't given the opportunity. So right. I'm grateful that I was pushed. And so now I'm going to push, but also embrace as many people as I can, regardless of their level, because it's just a different world now. It's just a different world with staffs and weeks and production.
I love that. And it is a completely different world. And to all your points, it's, it's going in the right direction, and it's looking positive. And thank you for everything that you're doing and everything that you do, and the stories that you're sharing, and just keep on doing what you do. And I want to say thank you to each and every single one of you. And for joining us today for the SAG-AFTRA Business Conversation.